Well, hello, welcome back to the final series of Through the Decades, the podcast, and you join me in Polliesfield, in Braintree, Essex, which is in Abbeyfield's independent and assisted living development. And today I am joined by a truly fascinating guest with some really incredible stories to share. His name is Brian. He is 80 years young. So Brian, can you get the episode started by telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and a bit about your life?
Well, I was born in the middle of East London during the war. Everything was bombed. My playground as a small kid was building sites, but it was on the edge of the Epping Forest, so part of my playground was the forest as well.
Yeah.
So I learnt about nature and being, well, I don't have many memories of the war. I do remember my mother took me to Great Ormond Street Hospital, and it had a glass ceiling, and I don't know whether it was a thunderstorm or a bomb, but the glass ceiling fell in.
Wow.
Fell in on everybody. Yeah, I wasn't injured, so I was all right. I was really lucky at the very beginning of my life, because my father's sister, my dear old Aunt Lena, lived with us until I was about maybe 7, 8 years old. She'd worked all her life, saved up all her money, never got married. She had property in Canada, property in Surrey, in a very rich area of Surrey, and property in South Africa. Well, having been a school teacher from when I was very, very tiny, before I went to school, she used to give me lessons in the evening, which I enjoyed. According to my mother, she taught me to read and write before I actually got to school. Wow. My first lessons were actually, the school was bombed. My first lessons were in the air raid shelter. All they'd done, the caretaker of the school had knocked a window in the corner of the air raid shelter, and the teacher sort of sat me there. She more or less left me alone. She was teaching all the others to read and write, writing on the board, this is how you make an A, this is how you make a B, and so on. And I was writing, well, we didn't have pencil and paper. We had, literally, the caretaker got me a piece of slate off the school roof and a piece of chalk.
Wow.
And that's all our writing materials were.
Wow.
And but the teacher just sort of left me alone. She said, as long as you don't disturb the rest of the class, you can do what you like. So I was writing the works of Tolstoy, both sides of the slate, kind of thing. But that sort of very early advantage, when I got to a later school, I think it turned into a disadvantage, because I got so used to educating myself that I never used to pay attention to the teacher. And I was always asking questions. I was taught always to question everything. One of my punishments for questioning the teacher, and it's something that could affect a person's life psychologically throughout, but I was already so sort of bolshy, and I was telling the teacher off. But my early punishment, there was a big tea chest in the front corner of the class for the rubbish, and my punishment was you have to stand in there with the rest of the rubbish. When I was coming back to the teacher, so well, you ought to be standing in the rubbish, not me, you're talking rubbish. I was already like that with the teacher, so I had a bit of a name for speaking up for myself. And I just went through school. Luckily, The first 3 schools, because we moved a short way, I was lucky that all the schools I was at were attached to Catholic convents, and the Mother Superior of each convent was also the head of the school. I was lucky that the last primary school I was at, the Mother Superior there was a world famous professor of pedagogics, the subject of how children develop and learn psychologically. Luckily, she got me to a very expensive boarding school. We didn't have to pay, because at that time there was, I don't know if it's still around, a direct grant system where certain kids who were so poor they couldn't possibly afford the thousands to go to a boarding school, they got a grant from the local council. So I went to posh, expensive boarding schools, and it didn't cost us a penny. I didn't get... the last school I was at was a boarding school. I was there, it was down in Surrey. I was there 5 years. I came out of there with no qualifications, no A-levels, O-levels. I don't know if there were O-levels at that time anyway. And for the first 20 years of my working life, I went through every kind of practical engineering, building site work, and I stayed at each job quite a short time. I got so bored with it. A friend of mine who lives up in Norfolk was a teacher, and he said, well, why don't you go to college? Because the way he put it, he said, you're just trying to satisfy your brain with what your 2 hands could do. You've got a brain, you should try and get an education. So he persuaded me to go to college. After 20 years, my first job was electrician. I did every kind of engineering, surgical engineer, agricultural engineer, aircraft engineer. I just got bored of every job within my first job. I did 3 years of a 4-year apprenticeship. I got fed up with that, moved on to what did I do next? I became a motor mechanic.
What was your first job which led to your working life? So talk about your working life. How was your working life?
Well, as I say, my first job was electrician. Electricians really see themselves as the gods of the building site. There's really nothing to electrical circuits in a house or a factory. You could get a science class in school, a group of 12 or 14, 15-year-olds. You could give them a battery and a bulb and a switch and a couple of bits of wire, and they could wire up a lighting circuit. There's really nothing to it in technology. The big deal for an electrician, I suppose, in a house is, how do I get the wire from here to here? Can I get above? Can I take up floorboards in the flat above? Is the wall hollow? Can I get a cable down the wall to the switch? Can I take boards up? Can I get under the floor? That's the big deal for an electrician, not the actual circuitry. It's nothing. After that, I was a motor mechanic. I was a London bus mechanic. I then worked for the Underground. I was going to become a train driver. First of all, they gave me a job as a guard. I did that for a whole 2 weeks. got fed up with it and did something else. And that's I was becoming my own teacher in many ways, in all those jobs. Aircraft engineer, I was just putting the doors on big, massive, great planes, lining up the doors on about 4 or 6 or 8 hinges, some of them. I became agricultural engineer. We get covered in things that most agricultural instruments get covered in. I couldn't find any outlet in a way. I couldn't, I was just fixing people's things or their property. It seemed to get no further. And that's when my mind was gradually changing, wanting to fix people. And that's when I went through, after 20 years trying to fix people's washing machine or the hairdryer, went to college with the idea of fixing people. Psychology, sociology, mainstream economics, or what they call applied economics, and I found that most interesting.
So let's look back on your life and some of the things that you've experienced, because it sounds like you've experienced so much within your life. I'm sure you'll agree. So what would you say has been the biggest lesson that you've learned during your life with everything that you've experienced? What was the biggest lesson that you've learned?
2 things actually: the nature of my education and the last few years of apartheid in South Africa, and you will have come across the name Nelson Mandela. I worked in London for Nelson Mandela until the end of apartheid. I worked in secret for the African National Congress. It was completely secret. I couldn't tell anybody what I did. My mother didn't know what I did. My friends asked me, what work do you do? And I'd say, oh, charity or something. Until the end of apartheid, and then they made a Channel 4 documentary about it. It was all fully exposed what we did, how we got rid of apartheid in South Africa.
So tell us about that. Tell us, how was life working for Nelson Mandela? I mean, hardly any people can say that.
It was strange in a way because, as I say, I couldn't tell anybody what work I did. We were we were locked into secrecy. Although we had quite a big building. We had a big building above some shops in Islington, in North London. We had 4 floors. Well, 4 floors in the basement.
Wow.
Security was such that whatever you did in that, you were just restricted to 1 floor, and security went up the higher level you went. You didn't have the key codes for any of the other floors.
Wow.
I was in charge of sending money in secret again, to people working against apartheid in South Africa. So I know how to smuggle money. And books, well, of course, any books about Mandela or his wife or the ANC, anything against apartheid was impossible in South Africa. So I learned how to smuggle books as well as money. And I smuggled, boxes and boxes and shiploads of them. My reports from the unions there, working on the docks, we only ever lost 1 shipment. It was been unloaded by a crane from a ship and dropped on the back of a lorry, and it was a pallet with 4 hooks on it and 4 chains to a central one, and one of the chains broke and all the books fell into the dock.
Oh wow.
It's lucky that the South African authorities didn't want to read any of the books, them having been soaking wet, of course.
Yeah.
They were just shoveled out of the dock and shoveled into a load of rubbish.
So how did this opportunity to work for, someone as incredible as Nelson Mandela, how did that opportunity for you arise?
I was writing. I'd written a book on the Vietnam War, and I was very friendly with the Vietnamese ambassador and his wife at the time. He wanted to persuade me to carry on from the book about the war to go to Vietnam, and Vietnam would have paid my airfare. They would give me somewhere to live, secretary to do all the typing, and what they wanted was from me a book on Vietnam's recovery after the war, how they recovered from the war and how they got to where they are now. But then I got married, I met my wife. I was also asked to go to University of Western Cape in Cape Town to teach in the department there. My wife was a bit worried about it because she heard, and there was a lot of lies and propaganda that South Africa had become full of violence, which it did in some way, but not as much as she thought. So I stayed in England. I didn't end up in Vietnam.
So just to finish on working for Nelson, what did your work consist of? I know you mentioned money earlier, but what work did you have to do in secret? It
was smuggling information or books that were banned in South Africa into South Africa, ways of smuggling them in secretly, and large amounts of money.
And all this for Nelson Mandela himself?
Not from him himself, but for the whole of the ANC,
yeah.
the African National Congress. It was money on 2 or 3 levels. Money to help the families who were working against apartheid, so that if the head of the family was arrested, the rest of we spent money so that the rest of the family could still survive.
Yeah.
We also paid for, if a member of the family was imprisoned, we paid for their legal representation. We paid for all their lawyers.
Wow.
And if they didn't have somewhere to live, we found them somewhere to live and paid for that.
Wow. So if you could go back to any age or any year in your life, what would it be and why?
I think it was then. I think it was doing that because I think I learnt the most then, although I was sort of self-educated in many ways. And even at college, going through degrees and teaching diplomas, that, I don't know, I can't say that actually taught me anything, but it taught me ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Ways of explaining things to people.
So on a similar note, what would you say was the best day of your life?
The best day? I think the day when apartheid ended, we knew that apartheid was coming to an end about 2 months before it did end. There was negotiations going on between Mandela and de Klerk, who was the apartheid prime minister, president at the time. We knew there were negotiations going on. We knew that apartheid was coming to an end. it was the day when we said, well, Mandela's been released. He's going to be the Prime Minister. He was elected as the Prime Minister. The ANC was elected in power. Apartheid, well, the obvious things of apartheid, like you go to a railway station, there's one pair of stairs which are all dirty, and it said blacks only, and then there was a nice clean set of stairs for white people. The outside appearance of apartheid had gone, but economically, even today, there's not a tremendous amount of difference.
What are you most proud of within yourself? So when you look back at your life and everything that you've done, what are you most proud of?
I think that the tiny, the minute part that I played in the release of Mandela and the end of apartheid.
So let's move now to the present day. How long have you been living here at Polliesfield?
I've been here almost a year and a half. I was one of the early residents here. It did make quite a difference in my life because we moved from a little village only 10 miles up the road, Great Yeldham.
Yeah.
But the difference in my outlook, the difference it made for me.
So what made you move to this development in particular? You know, you could have chose to move to any other development, but why did you choose Polliesfield?
We looked at other places, other people's residence, but they always seemed to be on a main road, or right on a roundabout, or something like that. I think the idea was that, old people don't want, the excuse was that old people want easy connections to the bus, to get on the bus and go to town. I don't think it was that at all. I think anybody that wants to live anywhere, you want to live in a side street somewhere away from the traffic. Here, it's just right. I can hear the traffic. I know the world is going by, and it's so comfortable.
So the location was a big factor for you?
Oh yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And how do you find this type of living? You know, the social aspect, but the independence in your apartment. How do you find it?
There are 99 apartments here, so some of them are 2, some are 1. There must be 140, 150 people here. It's like coming from a village where you don't feel a part, and it's like coming here and finding you've now got 140, 150 brothers and sisters and friends.
Oh. So finally, to wrap up on Polliesfield, would you recommend this type of living?
Oh, absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely.
So let's wrap up this episode by asking one more question that I ask every single guest. Anyone listening from the younger generation, what advice would you give them?
I would say question everything. That's the most brainy people in the world. Einstein, Asimov, all the world's most intelligent people have all said that. Ask lots of questions. Don't take what somebody's saying, whether it's your teacher or a policeman or somebody, your boss at work. Always question everything. You can learn most in that way.
Such interesting stories. Thank you, Brian, for joining me today, and boy, are we flying through the series. Make sure you're with me next week for the penultimate episode of the final series with my guest Graham. He'll be here sharing his stories through the decades, and as always, all that's left for me to say is make sure to share the podcast on Spotify, Amazon Music or YouTube, and turn on the notifications to never miss an episode. Apart from that, I will see you next week.